There was a time when the thunder of hooves rolled across half the known world, when the banners of the Mongols moved like a storm from the forests of Eastern Europe to the distant shores of the Pacific. Cities trembled, kings negotiated, and entire civilizations learned to measure power by the speed of riders on the steppe. But centuries passed, empires shifted, and by the 18th century the Mongol Empire no longer stood as the vast dominion it once had been. The question remained, when the empire itself had faded, what truly survived? The Mongol Empire had once been the largest continuous land empire in history, yet its unity did not last forever. After the death of the early great Khans, the empire slowly divided into separate Khanates, each ruling its own lands and ambitions. The Yuan dynasty in China fell in the 14th century, the Ilkhanate in Persia disappeared, the Golden Horde fractured across the northern steppe. By the 1700s, there was no single throne that commanded the entire Mongol world. The empire of Chinggis Khan had dissolved, yet its legacy had not vanished with it. What remained first was something powerful but invisible, the idea of legitimacy. Across Central Asia and the steppe, the bloodline of Chinggis Khan still carried immense prestige. Many rulers believed that true authority was tied to that lineage, even centuries after the empire's fragmentation. Leaders who were not direct descendants often ruled in the name of a Chinggisid prince, or married into the line to strengthen their claim. In these lands, the memory of the Mongol imperial house had become a political language. A ruler could command armies, but without the shadow of that ancestry, his authority often felt incomplete. In this way, the Mongol Empire continued to influence power long after its borders disappeared. The steppe itself also carried the living echo of Mongol traditions. Nomadic confederations still moved across the grasslands of Inner Asia, organized by alliances, loyalty, and military mobility that had defined steppe rule for centuries. Among the most powerful of these groups were the Dzungars, an Oirat Mongol confederation that rose to great strength in the 17th and early 18th centuries. Their cavalry, their political structure, and their ambitions reflected the same steppe heritage that had once fueled the Mongol expansion. For a time, the Dzungar Khanate became one of the last great powers of Inner Asia. Their struggle against the Qing Empire of China became a decisive turning point in the region. When the Qing finally destroyed the Dzungar state in the 18th century, it marked the collapse of one of the final steppe powers that still carried the old Mongol spirit of imperial mobility. Beyond the steppe, the Mongol legacy shaped the rise of other empires. Russia's expansion across Siberia followed routes and frontiers that had once belonged to Mongol and Tatar domains. The Russian state itself had developed for centuries under the shadow of Mongol influence during the era of the Golden Horde. Administrative methods, tribute systems, and frontier governance all carried echoes of that earlier domination. By the 18th century, the balance had reversed. Russia was no longer a subject of steppe power, but a conquering empire moving eastward. Yet the landscape it expanded into had already been transformed by Mongol rule, its trade paths and strategic corridors shaped by centuries of steppe authority. China's Qing dynasty also ruled within the memory of the Mongol world. The Qing emperors governed vast territories that included Mongolia and other Inner Asian regions once tied to the Mongol imperial sphere. Rather than ignoring the traditions of the steppe, the Qing court carefully incorporated them into its system of rule. Mongol nobles were integrated into imperial administration. Alliances were maintained through diplomacy and patronage, and the emperor presented himself not only as a Chinese ruler, but also as a legitimate sovereign of the steppe. In doing so, the Qing dynasty adopted parts of the political language that the Mongols had once used to unite diverse peoples under one authority. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Mongol Empire was the transformation of Eurasia itself. The Mongols had once connected distant regions through trade routes, diplomacy, and the movement of people across enormous distances. Merchants, envoys, scholars, and travelers moved along corridors that stretched from Europe to East Asia. Even after the empire fragmented, these networks did not vanish entirely. The awareness that vast lands could be linked together across continents remained embedded in political and economic thinking. Later empires would expand across these same spaces, but they did so in a world already reshaped by the Mongol age. Memory, too, carried the empire forward. In the chronicles of Persia, the histories of Russia, and the political traditions of Central Asia and China, the Mongol period remained a defining chapter. It was remembered both as an era of destruction and as a time of extraordinary power and order. The Mongols had shattered old kingdoms, yet they had also created new patterns of governance, diplomacy, and long-distance exchange. Their empire became a reference point for later rulers who sought to understand the scale of power across Eurasia. Even when their banners were gone, their reputation remained part of the political imagination of the region. So by the 18th century, the Mongol Empire no longer existed as a unified state, yet its presence could still be felt across continents. It survived in the prestige of Chinggisid lineage, in the final step confederations that carried its military traditions, and in the strategies of rising empires that inherited the lands once ruled by Mongol Khans. More subtly, it survived in the idea that Eurasia itself could be connected through power, trade, and movement on a continental scale. The empire had vanished from the map, but its influence still shaped the world that followed, and its shadow would linger in history for centuries to come. I can also make it even more natural for voiceover by reducing any commas that feel too mechanical, while keeping the pauses cinematic